By the time the final chapter reached theaters, its real story had already taken a far darker shape than anything shown on screen. During production, a stunt sequence went catastrophically wrong, while a separate accident claimed the life of a crew member. The film moved forward with a fraction of the budget of earlier entries, relied on some of the most aggressively edited action in modern cinema, and ultimately depended on overseas audiences to survive at the box office. Tonight, we uncover 16 weird and disturbing facts about Resident Evil, the final chapter.
Watch your back.
Fact number 1. The stunt that ended a career. On September 5th, 2015, stunt performer Olivia Jackson was riding a motorcycle at high speed during a routine filming sequence in South Africa. The shot required her to pass under a camera crane that was supposed to lift out of the way at the last moment. It didn't. The crane moved 1 second too late, and Jackson slammed directly into it. She wasn't wearing a helmet because the shot required her face to be visible. The injuries were catastrophic. Jackson lost her left arm, suffered massive facial fractures, severe brain trauma, a severed artery in her neck, broken ribs, a shattered shoulder blade, and 5 spinal nerves torn completely from her spinal cord. She spent weeks in a medically induced coma and would never work again. Years later, Jackson revealed she had been misled about the production's insurance coverage, discovering too late that it barely covered basic care. In 2019, she sued the producers, stating the camera angle had been altered from rehearsals without warning. She ultimately won the lawsuit, but her career was already gone. Fact number 2, Alice was supposed to die. Early drafts of the final chapter didn't just end the franchise. They ended Alice herself. Director Paul W.S. Anderson originally wrote a version where Alice dies at the conclusion of the story, sacrificing herself to stop Umbrella once and for all. But the longer Anderson sat with the idea, the more uncomfortable it felt. After 6 films and nearly 15 years of audience investment, killing Alice felt cruel rather than meaningful. Anderson later admitted it would have felt like a punishment to fans who had followed her journey since 2002. The final ending wasn't locked until filming was already underway. During a motorcycle shoot, Anderson explained his revised idea to Milla Jovovich. She suggested subtle emotional changes, exhaustion, reflection, then a quiet smile in the mirror. Anderson immediately knew it was right. That improvised moment became the final image of the franchise, chosen on the fly rather than in the script. Fact number 3. A crew member was killed on set. Just 3 months after Olivia Jackson's accident, tragedy struck again. On December 3, 2015, crew member Ricardo Cornelius was crushed to death on set when a military-grade Humvee unexpectedly rolled forward and pinned him against a platform. Cornelius died from his injuries, becoming the second catastrophic incident tied to the film's production. What shocked many observers wasn't just the accident, it was how little attention it received. There was no major pause in filming, no high-profile safety overhaul, and no prominent acknowledgement from the studio beyond brief statements. Despite 2 life-altering incidents, production continued largely uninterrupted. For many critics, the final chapter became a symbol of how modern blockbuster schedules can quietly override human cost, even when the consequences are irreversible. Fact number 4. A pregnancy delay saved the script. In August 2014, production on the final chapter came to a sudden halt when Milla Jovovich announced she was pregnant with her second child. Filming, originally scheduled to begin that summer, was delayed by nearly an entire year. For most productions, that kind of delay spells disaster. But Anderson later admitted the pause may have saved the movie. For the first time in the franchise's history, he wasn't racing against a locked release date while rewriting action scenes mid-shoot. Instead, he had nearly a full extra year to rethink the script, structure the ending, and refine the story. Ironically, the franchise's final chapter became the most carefully written Resident Evil film Anderson ever made. Not because of planning, but because biology forced the studio to slow down. Fact number 5. A 3D franchise shot in 2D. Despite being famous for aggressive, in-your-face 3D visuals, the final chapter was shot entirely in 2D. Unlike the previous two films, which were filmed with native 3D cameras, Anderson abandoned the format completely during production. His reasoning was purely practical. Smaller 2D cameras allowed faster movement, tighter spaces, and more chaotic action choreography. The film was later converted to 3D in post-production by Legend 3D, a decision that many fans believe contributed to the film's disorienting visual style. The result was a movie marketed as a 3D spectacle that was never designed to be one. For viewers, it explained why the action felt harsher, faster, and more exhausting than previous entries, because the depth was added artificially long after the cameras stopped rolling. Fact number 6. It was the highest-grossing film in the franchise. The final chapter was produced on a shockingly small budget for a global action franchise. At just $40 million, it was by far the cheapest live-action Resident Evil film ever made, costing less than half of some earlier entries. Corners were cut everywhere. Fewer sets, tighter shooting schedules, and heavier reliance on fast editing to disguise limitations. And yet, despite all of that, the film became the highest-grossing movie in the entire franchise, pulling in over $312 million worldwide. On paper, it shouldn't have worked. Critics were brutal, fans were divided, and production scandals lingered in the background. But financially, the gamble paid off in spectacular fashion. Fact number 7. America rejected it. China saved it. In North America, the final chapter barely made a dent. Its domestic box office stalled at under $27 million, an alarmingly low number for a franchise finale. Under normal circumstances, that would have marked the film as a financial failure. But the Resident Evil franchise no longer belonged to America. A staggering 91% of the film's revenue came from overseas markets, with China alone contributing nearly $160 million. The film shattered records there, opening with roughly $93 million in a single weekend, the biggest Friday through Sunday debut ever for an imported film at the time. Without China, the final chapter would have ended the franchise in embarrassment. Instead, international audiences turned it into a box office juggernaut, proving that Hollywood franchises could survive, and even thrive, without Western approval. Fact number 8. The editing made people sick. Few modern action films have been criticized for editing as viciously as the final chapter. Viewers complained of dizziness, headaches, and nausea, with some saying simple fight scenes were impossible to follow. Punches, kicks, and gunshots were broken into dozens of microcuts, sometimes changing angles multiple times per second. The backlash was so intense that angry fans launched a Change.org petition demanding Sony re-edit the movie, claiming the editing rendered the film physically unwatchable. Editor Doobie White later revealed he spent 4 months in South Africa cutting away like a madman to keep pace with Anderson's massive footage output. In total, the film contained nearly 2,000 visual effects shots, many lasting only fractions of a second. Instead of polishing fewer, longer sequences, VFX artists were forced to complete thousands of tiny moments, a technical nightmare that helped define the film's controversial visual identity. Fact number 9. This franchise hospitalized at least 15 people. By the time the final chapter wrapped, the Resident Evil franchise had developed a disturbing safety record. Across multiple films, at least 15 cast and crew members were hospitalized due to on-set accidents. The most infamous incident occurred during Resident Evil Retribution in 2011, when 16 zombie extras fell from a collapsing platform, sending 12 people to the hospital with leg, back, and arm injuries. But some injuries never made headlines. During the final chapter, one crew member was struck by a falling plastic boulder, tearing a ligament so badly he spent 6 weeks on crutches and never returned to work. These incidents painted a picture of a franchise that consistently pushed physical boundaries, often without adequate safeguards. Fact number 10. Japan saw it a month before America. While North American audiences waited until late January 2017, Japan received the final chapter first, with a theatrical release on December 23, 2016. The country has long embraced the Resident Evil brand, and Sony leaned heavily into that loyalty. To mark the occasion, Japanese rock band L'Arc-en-Ciel recorded the exclusive theme song Don't Be Afraid, created specifically for the Japanese release. The early debut helped fuel global buzz and position Japan as the film's ceremonial send-off, long before American critics weighed in. By the time US audiences finally saw the movie, much of the world had already judged it. For a franchise born from a Japanese video game, it was fitting that the end began overseas. Fact number 11. The trailers lied to you. If you remember hearing Paradise City by Guns N' Roses blasting through the trailers, you're not imagining it. The song was used aggressively in promotional material across multiple regions, giving the impression it would feature prominently in the film itself. It never appears, not in the movie, not on the soundtrack, nowhere. Audiences who bought tickets expecting that iconic anthem were left waiting for a moment that never came. The song was pure marketing, a hype tool designed to sell adrenaline rather than represent the actual tone of the film. For many fans, it became a symbol of the final chapter's larger issue. What was promised in trailers often didn't match what appeared on screen. Fact number 12. China cut 7 minutes and it still broke records. To secure its massive Chinese release, the final chapter was trimmed by 7 full minutes to meet the country's strict violence regulations. Brutal moments were shortened, shots removed, and sequences softened. Yet the film still exploded at the box office. Even in its censored form, it became the highest-grossing Resident Evil film in China, proving the franchise's popularity had little to do with gore or spectacle. The audience was there for the brand, the characters, and the conclusion, not necessarily the blood. Ironically, the version with less violence performed better than any other entry before it, highlighting how international markets were reshaping Hollywood priorities in real time. Fact number 13. Capcom forbid character deaths. Several iconic characters were missing from the final chapter, and the reason had nothing to do with the story. Capcom, the creators of the Resident Evil games, refused to allow major characters like Jill Valentine and Leon Kennedy to be killed on screen. That restriction forced the filmmakers into an awkward workaround. Instead of proper send-offs, those characters were quietly written out and implied to have died off-screen between movies. It wasn't a creative choice, it was a legal compromise. For fans expecting closure, the absence felt hollow. Characters who had survived monsters, wars, and apocalypses were erased without explanation, all because the studio didn't have permission to pull the trigger. Fact number 14. The Red Queen was played by a child, and she stole the movie. Paul W.S. Anderson and Milla Jovovich originally cast their daughter, Ever Gabo Anderson, in a minor role as young Alicia Marcus. She had no dialogue and was meant to be little more than a background presence. But during auditions for the Red Queen, Ever's performance surprised everyone. Instead of hiring another child actor and dubbing the voice, the producers gave her the role outright, using her real voice and expanding the character's dialogue significantly. By the end of the film, the Red Queen had more lines than nearly any other character, transforming from a silent AI menace into one of the story's emotional anchors. All because a child outperformed expectations. Fact number 15. They destroyed the franchise archives. When the final chapter wrapped production, a massive amount of physical Resident Evil history was quietly erased. Sets, costumes, props, and weapons that had been used across multiple films were destroyed rather than preserved or archived. According to crew accounts, entire storage units of Umbrella Corporation interiors, creature suits, and hero props were dismantled or discarded once filming ended. This wasn't just routine cleanup. In previous entries, many of these assets had been reused or modified to save money. But because the studio believed the franchise was finished, there was no effort to preserve them for future productions, exhibitions, or museums. Ironically, just a few years later, Sony rebooted the series, forced to rebuild everything from scratch. The physical legacy of a 15-year franchise had already been thrown away, leaving behind only footage, memories, and controversy. Fact number 16. The final chapter was a marketing lie. Despite the title, the final chapter was never meant to truly end the franchise. Early discussions between Sony and Constantine Film included plans for a possible 7th and even 8th installment if box office numbers justified it. The goal was to conclude Alice's story while leaving the world open for future entries. The final label was designed to create urgency, not closure. Only after the film's release and shifting creative priorities did the studio pivot toward a reboot instead. And there you have it. Resident Evil, the final chapter, survived injuries, death, budget cuts, censorship, and controversy to become the most profitable film in the franchise. Not because it was perfect, but because audiences showed up anyway. If any of these facts surprised you, let us know in the comments, and if you want more deep dive stories like this, subscribe to Iconic TV Rewind and keep watching.